31.7 million. Wrap your head around that for a second. That is the estimated population of Texas as of 2025, and it's an absolutely staggering number that perfectly sets the stage for our exploration today. We're looking at the second largest state in the U.S. by population, a place that is growing at a breathtaking pace, driven by a wild mix of raw geography, complex history, and a booming modern economy. And to really grasp its immense geopolitical weight, you have to look at the sheer scale of the place. We're talking over 268,000 square miles. If Texas were its own independent country, it would be the 39th largest on Earth. It's literally bigger than the entire country of France. Bounded by the Rio Grande to the south, the Red River to the north, and the Sabine River to the east, this massive footprint is the key to understanding basically everything else about the state.
Welcome to Essays Europa. In this explainer, part of our ongoing American States series, we are taking a deep dive into Texas, the Lone Star State. We're going to decode the geography, the history, and the economy of this massive territory. Because honestly, we need to look past those old frontier myths to uncover the hard facts that make this state an absolute global powerhouse today.
To do that, we've structured our exploration into 5 distinct areas: scale, geography, and climate, a history of shifting borders, the Texas economic engine, demographics, culture and identity, and finally, modern politics and challenges.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, scale, geography, and climate.
You know, the Texas landscape is so vast that it actually holds 11 distinct ecological regions. Moving east to west, it's like crossing entirely different worlds. You start in the thick piney woods and coastal swamps of the Gulf Coastal Plains, roll through the forested interior lowlands, flatten out into the prairies of the Great Plains, and then boom, you hit the Basin and Range Province. That far west area, known as the Trans-Pecos, is this rugged, unforgiving frontier of desert valleys and real mountain slopes.
Now, because it sits at the intersection of all these different climate zones, Texas breeds some seriously extreme weather. Down on the coast, places like Houston or Brownsville are sitting pretty with mild 40 to 50-degree winter days. Meanwhile, up in the Panhandle, Amarillo is regularly getting slammed with freezing temperatures and heavy snow. We're talking an environment that throws everything at you, from tropical hurricanes on the coast to brutal heat waves and deep freezes across the interior.
So, how did this massive landmass develop? That brings us to Section 2, a history of shifting borders.
Sovereignty over this land has essentially been a revolving door. It starts with the first Spanish map of the Gulf Coast way back in 1519. Then, after a long period of Spanish colonial rule, Texas becomes part of an independent Mexico in 1821. But tensions, especially over immigration and slavery, spark a revolution, creating the Independent Republic of Texas in 1836. Fast forward to 1845, and Texas joins the U.S. as the 28th state. That was a highly controversial annexation that actually triggered the Mexican-American War. And then, just 16 years later, they secede to join the Confederacy during the Civil War. It is a dizzying timeline.
But we have to remember, long before any European maps were drawn or national borders were fought over, this land was home to thriving indigenous cultures. The Caddo, for instance, were a settled agricultural people in the East who left a permanent mark on the state. In fact, the very word Texas comes directly from the Caddo word Taisha, which translates to friend. It's a profound reminder of the deep indigenous roots that existed here long before the modern state.
Following secession and the immense devastation of the Civil War, Texas underwent a massive social transformation. On June 19, 1865, which incredibly was almost 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, General Gordon Granger finally arrived in Galveston to enforce the freedom of enslaved black people. We now commemorate this nationally as Juneteenth, and it marked the turbulent dawn of Reconstruction for the state's economy and society.
Okay, let's move on to Section 3, the Texas economic engine.
That post-war reliance on agriculture eventually paved the way for massive, sweeping industrialization. Look, the historical myth of the cowboy on a cattle drive is legendary, for sure. But today's Texas, it is a corporate juggernaut. It is home to 52 Fortune 500 companies. That is the second highest concentration in the entire country. Thanks to a famously business-friendly environment, this economy is highly diversified, leading the globe in everything from tech and aerospace to biomedical sciences and international trade. And when it comes to energy, Texas has this absolutely fascinating dual identity. It's been famous for oil ever since the Spindletop Gusher in 1901, and it still sits on a massive 44% of all known U.S. crude oil reserves. But here's the kicker. At the exact same time, Texas is aggressively commercializing the future. They literally lead the entire United States in wind power production.
It's an energy giant straddling the line between traditional fossil fuels and future-focused renewables.
So who is driving all this growth? Let's get into Section 4, Demographics, Culture, and Identity.
The people powering this economic engine represent a rapidly shifting reality. The Hispanic and Latino American communities have seen incredible growth, recently overtaking the white population to officially become the largest single demographic group in the state. Add to that a massive black population of over 3.9 million people, and you get a state defined by constant dynamic migration. Texas is pulling in people from all over the country and the world, making it an incredibly diverse cultural space.
And let's completely smash that old stereotype of Texas as just a rural, wide-open frontier. Modern Texas is intensely urbanized. There's this mega region known as the Texas Urban Triangle, basically defined by the interstates hooking up Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. Get this, that triangle holds a staggering 17 million people. That means nearly 3/4 of the state's entire population lives in just one highly interconnected cluster of cities and suburbs.
To put that into perspective, Houston, San Antonio, and Dallas each have individual populations well over 1 million, putting all three of them in the top 10 most populous cities in the United States. Going from a sparse, rural agricultural society in the 19th century to this urbanized powerhouse in the 21st is arguably the most defining transformation in Texas history.
Which leads us directly to our final part, Section 5, Modern Politics and Challenges.
Today, Texas is navigating a really complex web of overlapping tensions. On one hand, you have this immense corporate and economic growth. On the other, there are incredibly deep political divides between the increasingly diverse progressive urban centers and the more conservative rural areas. Plus, sharing a massive international border with Mexico keeps Texas at the dead center of national debates on immigration and security. And of course, having an unrelenting influx of new residents puts a tremendous constant strain on the local environment and infrastructure.
And speaking of infrastructure, here is a wild fact. Texas is the only state in the contiguous U.S. that runs its own independent power grid, the Texas Interconnection. Because it's deregulated and largely cut off from the rest of the national grid, it creates some incredibly unique engineering and policy challenges. We've seen this independence severely tested recently as extreme winter freezes and brutal summer heat waves have pushed electricity demand right to the absolute breaking point.
So this all brings us to a critical, overarching question. With its massive, continuing growth, its rapidly shifting demographics, and its famously independent streak, how is Texas going to reshape its own future? And, by extension, how will the trajectory of the Lone Star State alter the economic and geopolitical landscape of the entire United States, and maybe even the world? It is a fascinating story that is quite literally still being written. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll catch you in the next one.